Hey everybody, welcome back to the Verdigris table. I am excited to be sitting down with Anto of Icarus Games for D20 questions and all sorts of other stuff. Anto, how you doing today, man?
Hello, people of the internet.
I am pumped for this.
It's gonna be
If
fun.
they don't know, and I bet they do, but if they don't know, where could the fine folks watching this find you on the internet?
So, my name is Anto. I run the YouTube channel Icarus Games and make all kinds of TTRPG related content. And you can also just find me lurking in every corner of the internet. Throw a stone, open up the bush, I'll be there. And you will find me. Just search Icarus Games anywhere and you'll find my face.
That's why he's on the show, actually. He was in my bushes. So I was like,
Yep.
hey man, what are you doing?
That's how I get on every show. I just wait outside in people's bushes until they invite me on.
It's a strategy. It's a tactic. I've been starting to employ it. You pop out, and then like they don't know
Yep.
what to do. You got them wrong footed, and then yeah, the world's your oyster. It's great. Uh, you also, I should mention, have a pretty dope zine. I'm gonna call it a zine.
Yeah.
It feels like it's got the heart of like zine culture, like DIY, especially like whatever Dungeon Dragon, like
Yeah.
old school. But Sidequest. Tell the fine folks at home about Sidequest.
So I do have a zine called Sidequest that I produce every single month over on Patreon. And right now I'm running a Kickstarter to fund production of the third annual. So once a year, get together, take 12 issues of the zine, bundle it together in a hardback book because printing individual small zines and trying to distribute them all over the world is a logistical nightmare. So it's much easier to put them into a big old beautiful hardbound book and make it available to folks. And I've done that for a couple of years now, and I'm currently running a Kickstarter for the third one. So it's like 148 pages filled with stuff for players and GMs. There's monsters and magic items and player options, and it's just packed with stuff. No matter what you're doing with fifth edition and some system neutral stuff, you'll find something that will inspire you, very much like those gaming zines of old. I grew up on all of those magazines, and one of my favorite things was every month just pouring through them, finding something to inspire me, even if it was for a system or for a game that I didn't run. I always just loved coming away feeling inspired. So that's very much like the spirit of SideQuest.
Yeah, there's this very interesting like space that you have found. I think because like you are like a logistics guy in my mind. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of transparency, there's a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
how, there's a lot of nuts and bolts. You know, you're not just like here's some hypothetical ways to make a good map. You're like
Yep.
here's this software, let's get into it. And I think that like diving down into the crunch, into the detail got you to a place where you like see through the matrix and you're like, oh, here's how you take this very particular thing and apply
Yeah.
it universally. And I think a lot of
It's
people miss that.
it's led to a lot of kind of really random things coming up. So some months it'll come to a few days before the deadline, and I'll have an idea, and I'm like, right, okay, we have to throw out one of the ideas for something that was going to be in this month's issue because this idea will not leave my brain and it needs to exist on the page. And now I'm going to stay up for like 3 solid days because this thing has to see the light of day. And that's very much how I've always written. I've been a professional writer for all of my working life, and it's very much how I've always operated, very fly by the seat of my pants, very kind of stream of consciousness style. And things like I have a couple of articles throughout the issues on like pricing magic items and rejigging the economy in D&D, and those kind of things are just very much like me getting into the minutia for my own sake and being like, maybe people would be interested in this. Let's deep dive.
And it shows. It shows. There's definitely part in it. I mean, like you can watch Anto build his world for
Yeah.
hours on stream and like it's not just a product. It's his
No.
heart is in it. He's making what he wants to exist in the world and
Oh yeah. Like
it's a
if
great.
I was doing this for money, I'd be doing something else.
I thought you were doing it for fame.
If I was doing it for fame, I'd be doing something else.
Hi-oh. So if you are watching this within a week or two of it coming out, link down below, support the Kickstarter, support independent creators. You get dope stuff in the process. You again, it's some people have a very tidy space because that's how they are naturally, and some people have a very tidy space because they needed to build that system because otherwise it would be chaos. And you
Hmm.
kind of strike me as the second group of like
Oh yeah.
very heart-driven inspiration. So you've invested the 10,000 hours in the logistical side of things as well. Like you
Oh
run a
yeah.
fucking tight ship. And I and I see it as someone who ran a Kickstarter and is still fulfilling it. Like you're just like boom, 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 boom. You got all your ducks in a row. And
It's very much one of those things where, as someone that runs a company doing this stuff, I am more afraid of overachieving than I am of underachieving. So when it comes to Kickstarters, like I am more worried that a Kickstarter would do like 100 grand than I am of it not funding. Because not funding, cool. That's the people saying we're not vibing with this. Go back to the drawing board, doing it again. Suddenly finding yourself unexpectedly making a lot more money than you might have planned for. I've seen so many people just be absolutely scuppered by that because they're not prepared for the logistics of it. So I'm very much logistically minded in that sense of I want to make sure people get this book. Like all of the stretch goals and stuff, super achievable, super like minor in comparison to a lot of the stuff in our industry. Cause I'm like, I want you to get this book on time. I want you to get this book when you've been promised it and not wait 2 years for it.
yeah, yeah, there's a lot of it, I bet there are folks watching at home who are like, how do I become like the guys on the screen right now? And Anto's a great resource for that because like you just put up your like annual like shareholder report basically. Like you
Yeah.
are super transparent about every aspect of what you're doing, and you don't sugarcoat it. You're not like, oh, poor
No.
me, please give me money, and you're not like so much of YouTube is like, I'm on a yacht, baby.
Yeah.
Look at my success. And you're like, here's the nuts and bolts, here's the nitty gritty. And I think a lot of people have a abstract idea of like, it's impossible to do this, or I'm gonna be rich and famous in 3 months if I only had a YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's
uh,
it's one of those things. I recently put up a video talking about how and where all my money comes from as a full-time creator doing this. In our We are both part of a little community of RPG tubers on Discord. Every year for the last like 4 or 5 years, I have been posting like financial breakdowns in there for other creators to see with even more detail than I would put publicly so that other peers in the space can see like the reality of what it takes to do this kind of stuff full time, because it's so easy to see someone on the other side of the screen and you might only interact with them for 20 minutes a week, and you build up this idealized version of what their life is like in your head, and what you don't see is the entire scope of the rest of their lives and everything else that it takes to run these businesses. And I'm very pro full transparency as much as appropriate, not to dox myself and put myself in danger on the internet.
it's a fine line. It's a
Yeah,
fine line
it's a
between
fine line.
open and vulnerable and in danger.
Yeah.
I'm gonna I was tiptoeing around it because I call it the speakeasy in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you said like, oh, we participate in this community of fellow
Mm-hmm.
creators, and like, put time out. Anto is responsible for creating a space for people like us who sit in a room and talk to no one for hours on end and have no peers or coworkers. You created and supported and occasionally policed a space that we can all come together, and that is an incredibly valuable thing. So thank you for that. Deeply,
Yeah,
deeply appreciated.
what we do is a hella lonely job
Yeah.
90% of the time, right? Like you say, we are talking to a camera and speaking to ourselves in an empty room 90% of the time. And it's one of the aspects that as creators, we don't really talk about and we don't kind of engage with and don't discuss with our fans and stuff, because we are in an incredibly privileged position to be able to do this kind of work. But it is also a really soul sucking element that it's hellishly lonely a lot of the time. And having a space where you can go and speak to your peers with your problems and say, hey, this thing happened to me today. And a few dozen other people could be like, yeah, that's happened to me. Here's how I dealt with it. Yeah, that's happened to me. It's no problem. It takes such a weight off when otherwise it would just be you sat alone in whatever room you film in, stressing over this thing.
Yes, I will say roughly half of the people who have been on the show I connected with through the speakeasy. Um, and like I learned that like YouTube is seasonal. I didn't know that my first year
Mm-hmm.
out. All of a sudden I was like, oh, well, I'm doing something wrong because everything's tanking, right? You feel like you
Yep.
don't know what's you and what's the algorithm or the internet or whatever. Like, I didn't know this was a seasonal business. It makes sense, but like never crossed my mind that like the weather would affect the internet.
It's it's one of those things that it's it's one of my favorite things to talk about is the kind of business side of doing all this, because obviously I spend so much time creating and putting things out there for the public, and I love doing that. But I also really enjoy talking about the nuts and bolts and the logistics and the businessy side of things, and having that space to talk about with other people is really great. And it also helps combat the loneliness, because for the first couple of years that I was doing this, I had literally no one to talk about it to, and it was really hard, especially like the kind of speakeasy had been put in place before COVID hit. I can't imagine how
Mm.
difficult it would have been trying to do this job when COVID had hit, if that space didn't exist and I didn't have a network of peers who understand the kind of unique problems that come from creating content online and being in front of the camera for your living.
Yeah, I mean it's every industry has its quirks and its whatever unique situations, but most of those industries, if you tell someone what you're doing, they're like, "Oh, that's a thing that people do."
Yeah.
Like, well, you're like, "Oh, I talk about an imaginary game on the internet." Like that's a job. You make like people
Yep.
pay. Are you sure? Are you okay? Are you insane?
It's made it so much easier now that I have books.
Ah,
When I meet new people, like when I meet family members of, like, I met my girlfriend's grandparents recently, and trying to explain to older people what it is we do, the concept conceptually, that difficult thing to do. So I just took one of my books with me and I was like, here you go, I made this is what I do. And that was much easier for them to understand. They're like, so you made this? And I was like, yeah, I wrote it, I laid it out, I did all the logistics for it. And they're like, okay, we understand that. We know what books are.
yeah.
We're like, cool. You don't need to know what any of it means, but you
Yeah. Can I
understand.
read it? Is the next question.
Yeah.
Like you can, but you won't understand a word.
Yeah. They start like, oh, it's very violent. I was like, yeah, that's kind of the assumed world that it's in.
It's cool. It's fantasy violence. It's fine.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into this. I mean, I could talk about this all day, and I if you're still with us, I'm hoping you're enjoying it. But let's get into D20 questions. You got a D20 handy? You're gonna roll
I
some
do
dice for me.
indeed.
Nice.
Let's go.
Let's
That's going to
go.
start with a 2.
So there's no good or bad, but there's a tonal shift between the
Yeah. Give me the
numbers.
spice.
So here we go. Here's the hard hitting questions. Number two, what is your least favorite aspect of running games?
Having to deal with those situations where players aren't giving you an equal amount of investment. So when players are kind of checked out, or when they're turning up and they're not given an amount of investment equal to what the expectation was. Excuse me. Diet.
Good mute work.
Oh my. So, like, if you have had your session 0 and your players all agree that you're going to be running quite a serious tonal campaign, and then the very next session, player comes to the table and they've rolled up a complete joke of a character. Those kind of interactions, when you have players who just aren't matching the vibe, it can be such a difficult thing to navigate, because you have to sit down with them and have the adult conversation where you're like, this isn't cool. And especially when, as a lot of people do, you play with longtime friends, it
Mm.
can be really difficult to navigate the interpersonal relationship of being like, we've known each other a really long time, we get on really well, but hey, this really isn't okay. And trying to be like, don't take this personally and don't be offended. I'm not saying we can't be friends, but I'm saying cut this out.
Yeah, talk about hard hitting. That is absolutely a great answer because it is like, hey man, I didn't come here to have adult conversations. That's usually the answer to like the
Yep.
deep-seated issues here, but like, oh man, it's like don't just like maybe don't make me. Like,
Yeah.
maybe just like get on board.
And that's
Uh,
always the thing. I'm always frustrated at the having to do it. The
yeah,
doing it, I'm fine with. We're all adults. I'll do the adult thing. I'm just frustrated that I have to be an adult when I've come here to play make believe.
right. Yeah,
I'm always
and
annoyed when people make me be an adult.
yes, yeah. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating. And it's the starting. It's not the doing, it's the starting.
Yeah,
It's like, okay, I have to like switch a gear in my brain now to
yeah.
have this conversation. So I think, yeah, I think a lot of people are going to hear that and resonate with it. And it's, oh yeah, there's a lot of like the DM does half and the players do half.
Mhm.
That's not the ratio's not quite off. And if one player is not pulling their whatever 10 to 15% in that ratio, then the whole thing's off the rails, you know.
Yeah.
So players
It's
do your part.
it's one of the things that I have come to really enjoy about paid games. I started experimenting with paid games recently, started paying to play in some games to experience some new systems that I couldn't find access to among the people that I knew personally. And it's been really refreshing because obviously everyone is paying, everyone is really on it, everyone is there, they show up ready to play, really in the right headspace. Everyone's all on the same page, all ready to go. And that has been incredibly refreshing. And I've enjoyed that immensely.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's one field that I keep like dipping a toe into, and like I need to
Mm,
like deep dive. Start playing. Where were you
yeah.
experimenting? Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, that's one thing I got to do like the deeper dive into because like this is what session zero is for. I think there's a
Yeah,
there's a
exactly.
misconception that session zero should be a game night. You should sit down for
Mm-hmm.
3 to 4 hours and talk about like session zero can be 3 minutes. But it's just like let's all get on the same page tonally,
Yep.
expectations wise. Because like we at Beer and Pretzels and Monty Python, I'm here for it. Cool. Just like I'm not gonna write soliloquies. Like let's
Exactly.
yeah,
Like I'm fine with whatever you want to bring to the table as long as we are all on the same page.
yeah.
Because I don't want to be spending all of the time trying to give you deep rooted, character driven stuff if you just want to swan around being silly. Because that's a very different type of prep for me to do.
Mhm.
And I'm fine to do that prep. I just need to know we all need to be on the same page.
And there's this like DM impulse to like please everybody and entertain everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So you got four people who want very different things, and you're
Yep.
like you're spinning plates, and something's gonna crash eventually.
Why I
Um,
usually start from the perspective of, hey, I'm going to run this game. Here are a couple of options of things that I'm interested in running, and then fill up the tables with people who are also interested in those things versus bringing people to me and saying, hey, what are you all interested in? And getting a bunch of different opinions and desires out of those versus going, hey, here's the things I'm interested in. Come and fill these slots for me.
yeah, perfect. Yeah, you need to like limits spark creativity, and you
Yeah,
gotta like start somewhere. And it's kind of on the DM to like establish some level of tone. As much as players need freedom and agency, they also got to know what movie they signed up for.
yeah.
All right, roll a d20. Let's go. Let's go again. Let's try to
That
beat
will
a
be a
two.
19.
Oh, he's swingy, folks. All right, we got a 19. What's your concept for the next campaign or game, even if, or maybe even especially if it might never happen?
Right. So if the players are watching, you need to turn this off immediately. I'm specifically talking to you, John, because you're the most likely to be watching this. So in our first campaign, the players had a big bad who they ran into in the second or third session, shopkeeper who they assumed was evil, who started out as not being evil, and they just assumed he was evil, never bothered to do any alignment checks, continued to buy items from this guy, signed blank contracts with him when they couldn't afford items. They ended up having like 30 cursed items off this guy when it was revealed he was evil. It was amazing. They eventually ended up defeating him like at level 20. They went into the Astral Sea, like found his fortress, defeated him. I really want to bring a campaign back where this guy has basically become Vecna, because at the end of that campaign, I specifically set it up so that they took one of his eyes and his arm, like while they were fighting him and doing their finishing moves. One of the players like shot an arrow and like got a crit, and I was like, oh yeah, you get him right in the eye. The next player got a crit, and I was like, oh yeah, you cut off his arm. And I was like thinking in my head, this was like 3 years ago, and I was like, this is going to come up one day. This is going to come up. And then I've been seeding it for like 12 months now. They've been running into this like whispered cult just on random side quests. So eventually they're going to run into him. And I can't wait for the day where I get to use that character's voice again, because they'll lose their minds.
Oh my, that got my juices flowing. That got
Yeah.
my DM like creativity peaking. Like that's a master class right there. Of like you again, this is what I was talking about like left brain, right brain is maybe like a not a great, it's a good metaphor. I don't think it's actually real. I don't think that's how your brain works, but like you've got the logistical, you got a 5-year master plan, my man, and it's just deeply creatively satisfying
Yep.
and adaptable. I don't think I like this shopkeeper at level 2. It's like, write that shit down. Like, there we go.
Yep.
I can work with that.
It's like, well, he wasn't originally evil, but sure, maybe. And then tied him into player backstories as like they had nebulous characters. And I was like, cool, he could be this nebulous character. And it ended up becoming a much like more substantial personal threat to the players than the actual big bad of the campaign. It was really satisfying for them as players, and they still talk about him to this day. And sometimes they'll run into characters that have, because for some reason I don't even know, I gave him a really like hammed up Romanian accent, so they heard it and they were like, he's a vampire, he's got to be evil. He wasn't a vampire, he didn't start out evil. But now
I've
anytime they
seen
run
80s
into
movies.
anyone,
This is the enemy.
yeah, anytime they hear anyone with that style of accent, they're like, is it this guy? And I'm like, no, he's dead. Why would it be him? You're not going to run into him.
Don't worry about it.
But always in the back of my mind, I'm like, one day though, one day you will.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so many newer DMs out there who like aspire for the 5-year campaign
Mm-hmm.
campaign arcing like to the next campaign sort of master plan. You don't do that by planning out 5 years in advance. You do that by adapting to the situation on
Yep.
the ground.
It's like taking the little pieces that your players drop or leave and going, how can I bring that back in interesting ways? And pulling on tiny little elements and going, right, okay, the players blew up the country that we were first adventuring in. So how are we going to deal with that going forward? What ramifications does that have for the next 3 campaigns that we have?
And that's the stuff that they're going to be the most invested in because they did it. It's the consequences of their own actions that they're dangling now. I love it. Give me another D20. That's going to be a hard one to beat.
Be a 20.
Woo, he's hot. What is, we might have just heard this actually, but what is your best move, trick, or hack? What's your dungeon master superpower?
My Dungeon Master superpower, in terms of one that could be replicated by the folks at home listening, is putting doors in front of players. Anytime that I need breathing room as a Dungeon Master, I will put a door in front of the players. Usually I will put 2 doors. So if I put 1 door, it will kind of roadblock them for a minute. If I put 2 doors, they'll waste half an hour arguing over which door is trapped, which one's the right way to go. And it will buy me enough time to kind of lay the tracks down in front of the train, do whatever it is that I need to do, or plan my next move. And it's so useful that I have employed it multiple times. 2 doors, 2 passageways, just a binary choice can slow them down surprisingly well.
I love that. So yeah, first question, it's not a door is not always a door, right? Like it's just a fork in the road.
Yep.
Buys you time.
A choice point where they have to pick between one of 2 options where neither is immediately obviously better than the other, and there's no way for them to determine which one they would be better off going down without committing to one of them, because then they will trip themselves up trying to decide, well, which one's going to explode, which one's going to open a portal to a parallel universe, and all of the kind of nonsense.
I love that. And I think it's very important to understand like the corollary, like the inverse of that is also
Mm-hmm.
true. Like if you're trying to keep it moving,
Yeah, one
a
door.
binary choice in front of them
Yep.
is going to hit the brakes. So you opened by saying the superpower that is repeatable by the folks at home, replicable.
Yeah.
So what is the secret sauce that you can't teach?
Oh,
What's the other answer to that question?
making your players cry, like knowing knowing what knowing the way that your players tick, and knowing specifically what will elicit certain kind of responses from your players. It doesn't necessarily have to be making them cry. That's a very exaggerated response. But I know that if I drop a certain kind of monster in a scene, the kind of response it's going to get from different players, like I can drop a monster that has certain traits, and even though none of my players have phobias, I know that different things will elicit different kind of responses from them. So if I want to create certain tones or vibes or feelings within the players, I can introduce a monster or an element to play that up in one player. And then I know that because that player is moving into that emotional state, they're more likely to do or say or behave in certain ways that will influence the rest of the party. So if I have a situation where I want to predispose the party to fleeing, introduce an element that I know the one player or their character is going to be particularly afraid of, that character becomes predisposed to flight, and then put a situation where the flight question comes up. That character is pre-primed. They'll be the one to suggest flight. Then the topic comes up. And like that kind of social conditioning, like playing 4D chess around them to try and make sure that they're experiencing, not that they're doing what you want them to do, but they're kind of getting into the emotional headspace, and they're experiencing the kind of tones that you're trying to establish within the scenes. What they do doesn't really matter. If they don't run, that's fine. It's, you want the question to come up and it to feel organic, and for them to be in the right headspace for it to make sense within the scene, and being able to drop in the right kind of triggers, but not in a negative sense, for that to happen earlier on in the adventure or the scene. Because I've played with the same players for nearly a decade now, I've gotten really good at being able to do that.
I'm very glad that you told John and company to stop watching
Yeah.
because, well, they probably already know that they're in the midst of a psychological experiment spanning
Oh
almost
yeah.
a decade.
Like
But
the number of times that a situation will come up and one of them will be like, that's exactly the kind of thing he would do. Like it's this situation must be X because that's what Anto likes to do. It's a common kind of statement piece from them.
I
Like
love
they're
it.
aware that I'm doing it. They're willing participants in the theater of it.
Yes. Hey, everybody, buy in.
Yeah.
Keep it moving. Buy in. Um, and then that gets you to the next tier of like, well, he knows that we know that he does this. And
Yep.
then it's just this recursive loop that can.
Which makes for amazing moments when it comes to things like mimics,
Ah,
because you're like, you walk into a room and I've done it before. I've placed I had a character in the party that was particularly ostentatious. They walked into a room and I placed the fanciest grand piano that you could possibly imagine. And the character was like, I'm not touching that. That's obviously a mimic, which it was. But so was literally every other item in the room, because I knew that they would think that that was a mimic. So I was like, cool. I know that you won't go for that, but you're going to go for something else in the room. And then when everything started coming to life, they're like, I hate being right.
that's 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 the masterful like it's almost like a comedic beat when
Yep.
like the precognition of what's coming doesn't deflate but like increases the enjoyment
Yep.
of it. It's yeah, always great. And anything with hinges is gonna be a mimic. I mean, come on, like the grand pianos are perfect. It's perfect. Okay. Actually, it's got two sets of hinges. Give me another d20, please, and
That's
thank
going to
you.
be a 4.
4. Well, this doesn't come up a lot actually. What motivated you to start making videos? Like, what's your like approach? What's the big idea behind the channel? And I understand that might have changed.
Completely by accident. So I got started within this space doing something completely different. I was making miniatures for tabletop war games. That was kind of my first love. That's how I got started in the industry. And I'd run a Kickstarter to do that. I was fulfilling that. As part of that, I had an office and I kind of needed to justify the use of the office once I'd finished fulfilling the Kickstarter. So I was like, oh, I'll start making videos because I had the camera gear and stuff from photography for doing all the photography for the miniatures. It's like I'll start making videos, making tutorials for making terrain and stuff. So I started making videos specifically for wargaming miniature related stuff for like a year. And then one week, one of the projects was running super long and I needed to put a video out. And I was like, hey, I've been using OneNote for my D&D stuff this week. So I'll just make a video on it and see how it does. And it got like more views than all of my years worth of videos combined overnight. So I was like, cool, I'll make another D&D video and see how that does. And then I just carried on and carried on. And then this has become my entire life.
Hmm, good
So it's
start.
very much kind of like a fall into it versus sitting down and consciously thinking, I'm going to start doing this.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes the best. Like, follow your bliss, right?
Yeah.
Like, you start on one path, and then like something comes in front of you, and you're like, huh, let's see.
Yeah.
Well, I'm at a fork in the road. There's two doors. Also, I can
Yeah.
sit here and debate for 35 minutes, or I can just see what's down this hallway.
And
Um,
it's something that I say it to my viewers quite frequently. I'm like, I will make content on this thing. And as long as you're watching it, I'll continue to make content on the thing. And if you stop watching it, I'll make content on a different thing. Like I'm not overly married to any one concept or idea or thing, and I'm completely open to pivot and change. If for some reason I started making videos on sneakers next week and they blew up and loads of people really liked them, I'd make video on stuff. I've never cared about sneakers, but I'd make videos on them. The I am not super committed to any one concept to the detriment of myself.
man, and yeah, I like that a lot about you, is that you don't identify with the thing, right? It's not an ego. I mean, I think so. In the heat of all the bullshit that I don't need to revisit again, and you were already talking about Pathfinder second
Mm-hmm.
edition, because
Yeah.
it had like it came out before the OGL. A lot of us
Mm-hmm.
were curious and dabbling, um, and then like everything got political is maybe too strong of a word, but it was just like people planting flags on hills, and you did a lot of Pathfinder 2e content, and then you were like, well, I don't need to play one game for the rest of my life.
Yeah,
And
it
I
was
think,
very much a case of at the time I was really, really excited by PF2. I was really, really enjoying PF2. So I was making videos on it. And then I stopped being really excited and really enjoying it. So I stopped making videos on it. And it was like, I'm sure that I could have continued to make videos about the system and they probably would have continued to perform well because they were performing well within the niche of PF2 at the time. Especially around the OGL, some of my Pathfinder videos were doing insane numbers for kind of Pathfinder, the Pathfinder niche of YouTube. But I had stopped enjoying running PF2. I still enjoy playing it, but I'd stopped enjoying running it, which is the way that I engage with games 90% of the time. So like I'm not going to carry on making videos about something I don't enjoy. Like it's something I struggle with a lot kind of in my personal life when it comes to you're at a house party and someone's like, oh, what's your special interest for like mastermind, or what's the one thing, like your defining thing, and everyone will always point to me and be like, oh, D&D and TTRPGs, and I'm like, yeah, that's the thing that I do for work and that's the thing that I probably know the most about, but I don't tie myself to it. Like I would talk about something else if something else came up. Like I love this job, but this is a job.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that's very healthy. And again, it feels like maybe the sort of thing you arrive at because you needed to, right?
Yeah,
Like, because like there's so many people on the internet yelling about these things as if it's like you play D&D or you play Pathfinder or you play other things, but you can't do all of them. It's like, why the fuck not? What are you talking about? Like,
yep,
why is your hey, I'm gonna go play fucking checkers and
yep.
Catan, like whatever.
It's
Take a breath.
in that specific Pathfinder video where I was like, I'm not running Pathfinder anymore. I got a lot of comments being like, I don't understand why you're going back to fifth edition. Just play other games. And I'm like, I am playing other games. If you in the video, I'm like, my weekly regular game, I'm going back to 5e, but I'm also playing a lot of other games. Like next week, I'll be playing PF2. And then, I'm playing all of these other games. It's just I only have so many hours to play a regular ongoing campaign, and my campaigns usually run levels 1 to 20 and are like wildly consistent. I was on the Roll for Combat stream with Mark Seifter, the guy, one of the guys that wrote PF2
Yeah, good
last
people.
week, and he said one of the most impressive things about you is how consistent you are in running your game, because I've been running it for like almost 8 years and we almost never miss a week. The only time we really miss a week is if I can't do it. And so that means that usually I'm committed to one rule set for the length of a 1 to 20 campaign, 3-ish years. So it's not a case of, oh, I'm going back to 5e and I'm only ever going to play 5e. It's I'm going back to 5e for this campaign. So 5e is what I'm going to live in for the next 3 years.
It doesn't mean you can't dabble in other things at the same time. Run one shots,
Exactly.
go play other things like not even as a DM. All right, follow-up question. What's your secret? How are you running consistent 3-year campaigns? I mean, I'm sure I have
It
theories.
is come into it with a almost dictator like level of commitment to running the game. You have to be like, right, in my case, we run on Wednesdays. And when we started, I was like, I'm running on Wednesdays. If you want to play in this game, Wednesdays is our D&D game. And at the start, it was probably excessive, the degree to which I was like, Wednesday is D&D game. Like, carve that time out.
Mm.
But now it's gotten to the point where the other people in the group don't arrange for things to happen on Wednesday evenings because that is D&D night. Obviously when there's birthdays and special events and holidays, things might change. But on a typical Wednesday, everyone in those people's lives knows that they're playing D&D, and everyone in my life knows that I'm playing D&D, and Wednesday is just D&D night. So unless something else comes up, like I'm ill or a whole bunch of folks are off, I run with 5 players, and as long as 3 of them are there, I'll be running. So it's much easier to maintain that consistency when you've kind of carved out in your mind that this is the night I play D&D, and barring like once a year celebrations or kind of extraneous circumstances, I'm playing D&D.
Yeah, and it
Because
exerts a gravity of like it's on the schedule, and I
yep,
I don't have to think about it. I don't have to devote willpower to it anymore. I
yep,
don't have to make like it happens.
yep.
And what
Same bat time, same bat channel.
exactly I say that I say that at the end of like half of my games. I
Yep,
kind of stopped recently, but like yeah, I used to say that all the time because yeah, it works because it
yeah,
works. And once you start negotiating, like we got one thing that we started, someone was it's like a newer thing. We started negotiating and like, uh-oh, we got one more week and then this is we're never playing again.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, and that's why I started running in the first place, because I'd been a player for years and I'd been in so many false start campaigns that had run 2 or 3 sessions and fizzled out because you'd get to the end of the game, like, when we play next? Oh, maybe next week, maybe the week after, we'll figure it out. And then you'd never hear from those people again. And I got sick of it. I wanted to play D&D, and I was like, I will have to do this myself. I had to Thanos gauntlet it and just do it myself. And I feel like a lot of DMs have that experience of they get tired of never having a campaign run for a long period of time, and they're like, I'll just do it myself.
That was yes, I had an experience. Like I've been doing this almost 10 years, but I am fairly new to D&D by like D&D talky people on the internet standards. But I looked around and I was like, I want to play D&D, and everyone's like, me too. Never have. Fuck, all right, I got to be the guy. I got to
Yep.
do it. I got to do it myself. If it's gonna happen, I'm gonna make it happen. And I think that's like the dungeon master story.
Yep.
Like, all right, I want it the most. So
Exactly. Like the dungeon master is usually the one that is the person at the table that is the most driven to keep the game going.
yeah, and we forget that at our detriment sometimes. It's like, why do I have to be the guy who schedules the thing? Because you adopted a management position as well as
Yeah,
every other freaking hat that you're
you
wearing.
are herding a bunch of cats. That is the life you've chosen.
Yes. Okay, awesome discussion. Remind the folks at home one more time. If I open up the Kickstarter, if I open up SideQuest magazine, what am I gonna find inside of there? I mean, I know the answer is kind of like everything, but
Yeah, so you're gonna find a whole bunch of stuff. The tagline is content to inspire players and game masters alike, and that's kind of the whole ethos. So every issue is filled with something to give players and game masters to come away with feeling inspired and to use at their table. So in year 3 of SideQuest, you're gonna find, I'll read from the list, you're gonna find multiple fantastic locations, so places that you can slot into your campaign or use to inspire new areas of your campaign world. 20 plus new monsters. So these are a variety of different monster types and CRs that you can pit against your players. And all of them include lore as well as a bunch of tables for integrating them into the game. So things like, what are some signs that the monsters have been in this area? What's some kind of knowledge checks that your players can roll, and based on the DC, here's the things that they know about this monster based on their weaknesses and their strengths and stuff like that, like usable stuff for the GM to implement. Tables for encounters for the monsters. So depending on party level, you might face just one of this monster, you might face it with a variety of mobs and stuff like that. Again, for it to be usable at the table, and then the monster stats. You're gonna get more than 30 magic items, including stuff obviously for players, but there's also a couple sprinkled in there that are more like treats for the DM. So my favorite is the planar bomb, which is something that blew up one of the countries in my campaign. At the end of one of our campaigns, you attune it to one of the elemental planes, and it basically forces that plane into the material plane and just blows up a section of the material plane and infuses it with elemental energy. So, like, if you attune it to a necrotic plane, you'll turn like a 500-mile radius of the material plane into like a blighted wasteland where nothing can grow. Or if you attune it to the plane of Earth, you'll like crack the foundation of the Earth and like geysers of lava will start sprouting up everywhere. That's what happened at the end of my campaign. Blew up the country that they were in, like cracked all of the plate tectonics. It was like the scene where Namek in Dragon Ball Z was exploding while they were fighting the big bad evil guy. It was amazing. So that's kind of like a little treat for the GM to be like, hey, give this to the big bad evil guy and have them use it and watch as your players lose their minds. You'll find new factions, world building articles, GM advice, a dozen iconic NPCs. So these are one for each of the base classes. It includes plot hooks to like integrate them into your campaigns, kind of backstory, and then stats to use them to be like, hey, here's a recurring character that your players can meet and be introduced to and kind of get some story beats out of, and then just a whole bunch of other random stuff that you'll find useful, but whichever side of the screen you're sitting on.
Uh, I'm sold. I love it. Links down below. Go back to Kickstarter. If you were watching this in the future, SideQuest also comes out on Anto's Patreon. It's a zine. It's monthly. The Kickstarter is an anthology of the years. This is year 3, so you tried and true and tested and apparently play tested
Yep.
to great effect. Awesome. I've got this little tool where I try to like take a lot of those types of things and connect it into the character backstory so they give a shit. And so I have more fun. So that's what we're gonna do next time. Thanks so much for watching. Go check all of Anto's stuff in the meantime. Icarus Games. Be kind, have fun. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.